Joel Miller.
Who are you?
Guess.
That's a nice scar you have on your right temple there. And I'd say you're about, what, 6 feet? In your 60s now? You actually are. Pretty handsome. Congrats on that.
This is the why.
So, I just watched the first 2 episodes of HBO's The Last of Us Season 2, and so far it's left me feeling a little bit cold. I recently just put out a video re-examining The Last of Us Part 2, which I don't particularly love, but I do really enjoy parts of it, and I've come to terms with what it is to some degree. I did say at the end of that video that I was very intrigued to see how Season 2 of the show would go about adapting that game's storyline, even musing that making alterations to the pacing and structure could end up improving the experience. But what I've seen so far just reaffirms that a lot of the issues that the first season had are very much still prevalent, and some of the changes made so far are a bit baffling, to the point that I'm actually starting to appreciate the game a heck of a lot more.
If you're feeling lost,
Tell me to look for the light and I'll break your jaw.
Now, I know that a lot of people do really love the first season of The Last of Us, particularly those who never played the game, and I enjoyed most of it back when I first watched it in 2023, but I've never felt a compelling urge to re-watch the show since it aired because, while it is a decent adaptation all things considered, it still 100% pales in comparison to the game, largely due to some odd structure and pacing issues. The arbitrary 9-episode length felt far too short to cover the game's story and accommodate the many ideas that showrunner Craig Mazin wanted to explore outside of the original narrative. Some ideas of which were good, like the Bill and Frank episode. It's one of the best pieces of standalone zombie fiction in recent memory, but felt a bit out of place and grinded what was meant to be Ellie and Joel's story to a complete standstill for almost an entire episode.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
The show seemed like it really wanted to focus on the world building, like with the Jackson episode, and that would have been fine if there had been like 12 or 16 episodes. Instead, what ended up happening is that a lot of the scenes from the game ended up feeling incredibly rushed and almost kind of cheap, lacking the deliberate slower pacing of the game, where pauses between certain lines of dialogue said a lot about the characters. I mean, take the university scene where Joel is injured, for example. That was an incredibly well-directed sequence as Joel slowly limps through the halls, his blood staining the walls as he collapses into cover, and we had to watch rather helplessly as Ellie takes the lead in combat, as a wonderful role reversal. It's only a couple of minutes long in the game, but this was reduced severely in the show, and relegates Ellie to just awkwardly standing in the background not doing anything.
What are you doing?
Season 1 ultimately did end up capturing the general essence of The Last of Us, but as Writing on Games put it in his recent video, a lot of it was just double the time for half the substance. And the same thing is happening so far with Season 2. It feels like the show was more interested in exploring ideas and things that weren't in the game than it is just simply adapting the story. Some of these things aren't inherently bad ideas, however. I enjoyed the slower pace of some of the scenes with Joel in the first episode, seeing the role that he played in the community of Jackson outside of patrolling. The scene with him and Dina was a great addition, as we never got to see them interact in the game, and I liked the idea of him considering Dina to be like another girl that he'd accidentally adopted. Also, having Dina be on patrol with Joel when he's killed is an interesting change that I kind of like, because it gives her much more of a motivation to want to follow Ellie to Seattle. This also fixed a major issue many had with the original game, in that Joel and Tommy just casually revealed their names to a group of armed strangers, whereas now Dina unknowingly reveals his name to Abby after Joel rescues her. But, much like in the first season, these deviations away from the source material, interesting as they sometimes may be, have wound up hurting the show's pacing when it comes to adapting the core narrative beats from the game.
See, there's a sequel. Wasn't as good.
The second episode so far has made a number of changes that honestly made me completely check out before Joel meets his demise. Much of the episode's runtime is devoted to the settlement of Jackson preparing for a potential attack from Infected, following reports of large groups in the area, with Ellie going off on patrol with Jesse instead of Dina like in the game, an issue that I'll come back to in just a moment. Abby wanders off on her own like she does in the game and triggers the Horde, which then decides to head off towards Jackson due to a construction worker hitting a cluster of cordyceps things in a pipe that then alerts the Horde. What follows is a fun and lengthy action sequence as Tommy leads a defensive effort as the infected break their way into the settlement and all hell breaks loose. But what I kept thinking the whole time was, man, this would have been a lot cooler in the game. It felt like it didn't really add anything other than spectacle for the sake of it, and was just a big distraction, since the real tension of the episode should have been on Joel and Dina rescuing Abby, and us knowing that Abby intends to kill Joel. Then the eventual scene of Abby killing Joel winds up feeling more drawn out and rather rushed at the same time too, weirdly enough. Instead of the fierce and abrupt assault like was seen in the game, this version of Abby, who is being played fantastically by Caitlin Dever, actually ends up giving a drawn-out speech to Joel, to which he responds rather appropriately to.
Oh, it's funny. I have waited
No,
so...
just shut the fuck up and do it already.
Then, in a baffling move from Craig Mazin, Abby reveals her motive to him and the audience, and this is where I basically checked out from the episode because I simply just couldn't understand why on earth they were revealing this information about Abby so soon. The game doesn't reveal this motivation until the end of Ellie's campaign, which made you feel completely aligned with how Ellie feels. She doesn't know Abby's reason for killing Joel, and as her brutal journey across Seattle waged on, she began to care less and less, fueled by a fervent hatred towards the woman who took so much from her, and we as the player shared in Ellie's ignorant anger. By revealing this early in the show what Abby's motivation was, it removes all that tension that propelled Ellie's story, because now we as the audience know that Abby was in fact justified for killing Joel. And now, we're not going to feel for Ellie in anywhere near the same way because we know what she doesn't. And then, even though Neil Druckmann insists that the scene was just as brutal as the game, I found it to be kind of hollow and a lot tamer. Abby's friends seemed less eager to be complicit in her violence, and the whole mood of the scene was just completely different, with it being a more open space and brightly lit, compared to the game where it felt like Ellie descends into the coldest depths of hell when she finds Joel. There wasn't that haunting muffling of the audio as Abby's friends all argue with each other, none of the POV shots from Ellie, they just up and leave us with an awkward scene of Bella crawling on the ground, instead of the harsher impact of knocking her out, and awakening to realize that it wasn't a bad dream. Joel was really gone. I just couldn't shake the feeling that the game, no pun intended, executed this sequence so much better. Abby explaining everything to Joel and him seemingly accepting that he deserved what was coming, versus in the game where, in one last act of defiance, Joel basically declared that he couldn't give two shits about who she is.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed? Get this over with.
This all happens after the massive action sequence in Jackson, remember, where the town is left devastated by the Horde attack, and it robs the scene of losing Joel of a lot of its impact, because now he may as well have just been another casualty in the attack. The town isn't going to mourn him specifically now like it was in the game, and I just don't see the point in changing that. And this is without even mentioning how this scene with Ellie and Dina in the game is completely absent in the show, replaced with essentially the same thing but with Jesse and none of the romance. It was brutal in the game how Ellie went from being the happiest she's probably ever been starting her relationship with Dina to then frantically going back out into the snowstorm and then watching the one person who had been a real constant in her life be murdered right in front of her. And it's not a scene that they can just throw in at a later point in the story either, because in the original, its placement was very deliberate as I just explained. I also hate to say it, but Bella Ramsey just isn't very good this season either, as what is supposed to be a much older Ellie. I believe this is a combination of Craig Mazin both writing her as essentially the same Ellie from last season, and then Bella not doing anything in her performance to make Ellie feel different. Compared to Ashley Johnson's performance in the game, where you could tell that Ellie was older by the way she spoke in a much softer and lower register. She was more measured in the pace of her line deliveries, and you could just feel the sense of weariness to this older Ellie before Joel was even gone. And then you cut to the show and Bella's Ellie is still acting like a child. I don't know, I just don't really see Bella being able to carry the show going forward because everyone else in the show kind of outshines her, which I feel bad in saying. And yeah, they probably should have just recast her and just kept her for the flashback sequences. I mean, Kaylee Spaney was right there. After seeing her in Alien Romulus and Civil War, I really don't understand why they didn't do the same thing as House of the Dragon and cast her as the older Ellie. The whole episode, as I said, just left me feeling cold. In fixing some of the issues with the game, they've bizarrely also created new issues that I think are more detrimental. I can appreciate doing some things a bit differently, especially fixing the issue of how Joel's name was given away to Abby's group, but the pacing and structure at this point in the show I'd argue is worse than the game. And remember how season 1 only had 9 episodes? Well, this season only has 7.
What?
Granted, the show has already been renewed for a 3rd season, I just don't see how Craig Mazin is going to be able to effectively condense the narrative of Part 2 down into what I'm going to assume at this point is merely 14 episodes. Especially when he still seems to think that adding more stuff, filling in every little narrative gap, is making the experience richer, when, again, it's really just double the stuff, but half the substance.
Look, I don't know what's going on with you and Joel.
Maria,
Guy really cares about you. And I'm sure he didn't mean to.
we're fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, offense, because that's the one person you've been avoiding like the plague.
Well, we're better now, okay?
As of when? Because last night
Yeah, I know what happened last night. Can you shut the fuck? My shit with Joel is complicated. I know that. From the outside, it probably looks really bad. It has been really bad. But I'm still me, he's still Joel, and nothing's ever gonna change that. Ever. So you can all stop talking about us, worrying about us, and thinking about us. Alright?
So you two hash it out.
The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that had issues with its storytelling, but everything I've seen thus far in the show has had the unexpected effect of really making me appreciate that original vision even more. There's stuff that is good, and for the most part the show is technically well made, and Caitlin Dever really shines as Abby, but at this point, I honestly think I'd rather just replay the game than continue watching the show if it's just going to end up being an even worse version of a story that was already fundamentally flawed to begin with.